With clean water a concern, the government is advising people to only drink bottled water. The main airport is still closed due to heavy ashfall, hampering international relief efforts. Our correspondent Owen Poland has more on the international humanitarian response.
It's understood that the broken undersea communications cable could now take up to 4 weeks to fix. So that's going to make it difficult to assess the full extent of the damage. However, satellite images and photos taken by reconnaissance aircraft over the past day or so have revealed what's been described as catastrophic damage on some islands as a result of the tsunami and the toxic volcanic ash cloud that experts say could create an environmental crisis because of the contamination to food crops and sea life. The race is now on to clear a thick film of volcanic ash from the runway on the main island of Tonga so that emergency flights can bring in much needed aid. In addition to the ongoing threat of more eruptions, a tropical depression is now forming in the Pacific Ocean, and there's a concern that it could develop into a tropical cyclone over the next 48 hours. Meanwhile, 2 New Zealand Defence Force ships have already set sail for Tonga with much needed drinking water and essential equipment, including a helicopter that can deliver urgent aid to the outlying islands. Australia is also sending a ship this week, and China has in the last 24 hours offered to fly in food, water and disaster relief equipment once that airport is opened. The International Red Cross estimates that 80,000 people could be affected by this disaster, and they're standing by to launch an international disaster relief fund.
The impact of the tsunami has been felt across the Pacific. In Peru, cleanup oil into a refinery when it was moved by the waves. At least 2 kilometers of the country's central coast are affected, along with 18,000 square meters of beach. Carcasses of birds, fish, and other species have washed ashore. Authorities say the spill is under control now, and investigation is still ongoing. Let's now get a big picture of Tonga and the underwater volcano off its coast. Tonga is a Polynesian archipelago made up of 176 islands southeast of Fiji. The country holds a population of 100,000 residing on 36 of its islands. Tonga withdrew from the British Protectorate and joined the Commonwealth in 1970. The Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai is an underwater volcano situated about 30 kilometers southeast of Tonga's Vanuatu Islands. Scientists say it has been active over the past few decades. Its eruptions in 2009 and 2015 created 2 new land masses. The most recent volcanic flare-up began in December last year with gas, steam, and ash plumes rising about 12 kilometers into the air. Its eruption on January the 14th was followed by another massive blast the next day, which triggered tsunami waves across the Pacific. Earlier, we spoke to Professor Scott Bryan, a volcano researcher at the Queensland University of Technology. He said the environmental impact of this underwater volcanic eruption off Tonga will largely remain localized at this point.
We certainly saw with the tsunami waves that they basically extended almost entirely across the whole Pacific Ocean, affecting the west coast of the Americas, up into Japan, down to New Zealand and even Australia, as well as locally in Tonga. Thankfully, those tsunami waves have dissipated, but the ocean currents are really not going to transport material too far from the volcano, and certainly not globally. Most of the currents, and certainly the surface currents, will distribute material through the Southwest Pacific region, like we see with the pumice rafts produced by some of these volcanoes in Tonga as well, which drift westward through Fiji and across to Eastern Australia. So any dispersal and oceanic effects would at this stage be fairly localized to this region. But from the satellite images, we're not seeing too much material being transported and sitting on the ocean surface that might cause any huge impact to the broader ecosystem. Certainly the ash deposition on and around the islands and that ash washing off onto the fringing coral reefs may have some impact to those shallow marine ecosystems locally. But hopefully at a regional scale, we won't see too much impact from this eruption.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center, a modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter on CGTN. See the difference.
Now let's recap our top stories of the hour. In Tonga, the death toll rises to 3 in last week's tsunami as New Zealand sends Navy ships to provide aid. America's top diplomat visits Europe ahead of a meeting with his Russian counterpart to defuse tensions over Ukraine. The WHO warns the pandemic is far from over as it urges continued vigilance against Omicron. The Beijing Winter Olympics is 16 days away and the athletes
We interrupt our sports scene broadcast to bring you some breaking news. The Tongan government has confirmed 3 people died from an undersea volcano and tsunami that thrashed the Pacific nation on Saturday. The government says nearly all the houses on Mango Island are destroyed. Joining us now is Zhao Yongming. He is an employee of China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation in Tonga. Hello there, Mr. Zhong. Now please tell us, what is the latest out of Tonga?
您好，请问汤加现在的情况是怎么样的呢？
汤加目前是这个时间呢是
right now
下雨，我所在的汤加塔布岛。
For the place I live,
然后火山爆发之后，这几
and
天
after the volcano
整个
eruption,
火山灰落灰非常严
and there are
重，
many
整
falling
基本上
ashes,
电到
and this will also
全部
affect
都
the
是落。
supply of the power.
现在这个整个岛大部分
For
地
the
方
whole
是有
place,
电的，少
most of the places are in restriction.
目前我们公司在汤加的员
Right now,
工都
for
是安
our
全的，
company,
暂
all
时
of the employees of our company are safe.
然后我们公司内部储备的食物
And
也是
also, we
可以
have
供我们自
food
己使。
available.
Mr.
目前
Zhao,
这个国家的
For the whole
超市
country,
还有其他
for the
目
supermarkets
前都是正常营业。
are in normal operation.
大概情况就是这样。
So that is the general update.
well, that is certainly good to hear. Now, please, can you tell us a bit more about what aid has been so far offered to those affected by the tsunami?
那您跟我们介绍一下，就是现在我们获得了一些什么样的援助呢？
目前我们公司这个中方员工主要
So
是
for the
在
Chinese
驻
employees,
在加拿大使馆的指导下，我们及时和使馆这边进行
we are
消息
working
进行
with
沟
the
通。
embassy and get the latest information.
大使馆这边也是通过卫星电话和
The
我们国内
embassy
的
will
领
reach
导
us
同
with
事取得
the
了
satellite telephone.
告知了我们在汤加的相关情况。
And they tell us what happened in Tonga.
我们现在是已经可以用公司内部的卫星电话
Now,
和
right now, we
国
are
内的
able to
同事取
use
得
the
联系。
internal telephone to reach to our colleagues in China.
你们先报备我们在汤加的相关情况。
So this is the current situation.
相当于主要的信息来源是来自于
So
驻汤加
the
大使馆。
majority of the information we got is from the embassy in Tonga.
主要的生活物资和饮用水、
And for
水
the
源是
supplies
我们
and the water supplies
自己
will also be provided locally.
大概情况就是这样。
So that is the update.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao. Please stay tuned to CGTN. We will have more on the aftermath of the Tongan tsunami later on our program.